Now on the Georgia Vote.
I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States.
It is official. Donald Trump, once again, the Republican Party's pick for president. We recap the party's national convention in Milwaukee and look at how Georgia's GOP leaders see the race for the White House.
Also,
in a democracy, there shouldn't be violence involved.
Former Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, one-on-one with 11 Alive on the Democratic Party's chances come November, and if she feels President Joe Biden will still be her party's nominee.
And we break down another monumental week of politics with Stephen Lawson and Jerry Gonzalez in our roundtable.
All right now on the Georgia Vote.
From the 11 Alive studios, this is the Georgia Vote with Faith Jesse and Zach Merchant.
Good Sunday morning. Welcome to the Georgia Vote. So one major political party locks up the top of its ticket while the other party still has a lot of questions surrounding their nominee for president.
So let's begin right here with this week's Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Thursday night, Donald Trump accepted his third straight GOP nomination. Part of his speech featured some common themes from his stump speeches, including references to a nation in decline and a country on the cusp of World War III. But the former president also spoke about last weekend's attempted assassination against him. He says the shooting, in which one spectator died, 2 others were hurt, and the suspected gunman was killed, helped crystallize his priorities should he win a second 4-year term.
Despite such a heinous attack, we unite this evening more determined than ever. I am more determined than ever, and so are you. So is everybody in this room. The attacker in Pennsylvania wanted to stop our movement, but the truth is the movement has never been about me. It has always been about you. It's your movement. It's the biggest movement in the history of our country by far.
One night earlier, it was J.D. Vance's chance in the spotlight. The 39-year-old senator from Ohio shared his life story while branding President Joe Biden as a career politician. Vance also alluded to last weekend's assassination attempt on former President Trump while making a forceful case for the America First approach Mr. Trump championed while he was in office.
For the last 8 years, President Trump has given everything he has to fight for the people of our country. He didn't need politics, but the country needed him. Consider the lies they told you about Donald Trump, and then look at that photo of him, defiant, fist in the air, when Donald Trump rose to his feet in that Pennsylvania field. All of America stood with him.
Well, this past week, we also saw Republicans from Georgia play key roles at the RNC. Among those taking the stage, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She used her primetime speech at the convention to say a second term for Donald Trump would lead to a more prosperous future for the U.S. economy.
An American government that serves the interests not of the wealthy, the globalist, or the powerful few, but of all hardworking Americans is within our grasp. Donald Trump has, and he will, make America successful again.
Well, soon after her remarks to delegates, Governor Brian Kemp sat down with CNN's Wolf Blitzer. He called Greene's tone in reaction to last week's assassination attempt on former President Trump, quote, spot on, and was also asked about Greene saying the establishment in Washington has sold us out.
I think the establishment in Washington for a long time now, from a Republican governor's perspective, there's been a lot of frustration from that, which is one reason that, we have really, I think not only myself, but a lot of other good Republican governors have really tried to take the policy lead over the last several years and be the incubators of democracy. And so, look, I'm as frustrated with the federal government as she is.
Georgia brought 59 delegates to the RNC in Milwaukee, along with 56 alternates. They represented much of the power base for the GOP in our state, and they all carry the mission of bringing Georgia's 16 electoral votes back to their side in November's election after Joe Biden carried the state in 2020. We caught up with a few members of the delegation to get their thoughts about the Trump-Vance ticket.
Most of us feel Georgia's a red state. You know, we had a hiccup in 2020 for reasons, and we think that we're a red state. And we think we're going to redeem ourselves here in November.
Our grassroots are more motivated than ever, and especially in light of recent events. I think you'll see the final fringes of the taboo of expressing your support for Donald Trump will be gone, and people are going to be full-throated supporting him.
We want to make sure that we're focused on America first, and that means things like securing our borders, fighting rampant inflation, stopping crime, and enforcing the rule of law, and letting, the big government agenda go. And that's what, Americans want.
Yeah, so with the RNC finished, the next major event will be the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, starting in roughly 4 weeks. However, there are still a lot of questions about who will receive that party's presidential nomination. Now, there is more reporting that President Joe Biden may drop out of this race. Late Thursday, CNN cited one senior Democratic advisor who says the president is becoming receptive to talks of stepping aside, even asking those close to him if they think Vice President Kamala Harris could win. This joins reports of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer having separate meetings with the president over concerns Democrats could fall short in the House and Senate.
As we navigate our current political turmoil, it can feel like we are living through history. So we thought this was a good time to meet with the man widely regarded as the dean of political science in our state. Professor Charles Bullock started his career at UGA in 1968 and now helps put our current moment into context. Are there any other years in American history that, in your opinion, feel like this one?
Not that I've lived through, no. I guess maybe if when we're living in 1860, the building towards the Civil War, maybe you'd kind of get that sense that something new is happening each time and the country's being torn apart. But no, I mean, there's nothing like this that has happened. Although we've seen major changes certainly have taken place, but nothing with the kind of, you were saying, the back-to-back-to-back shocks to the system.
And for you to go to the lead up to the Civil War, I mean, that's a pretty serious pronouncement.
Well, it is, yeah. And again, one of those questions I often get is, have we ever had times like this? And yeah, we did have a time where the pressures on either side and the inability to bring together, we have experienced that, although none of us were around for it.
What does our history teach us about this moment?
For example, here in the South, we did get through the Civil Rights Movement. And if one were to go back and look at what was being said, say, in 1954 when Brown versus Board of Education was being decided, lots of, the average white person, and certainly the white political leaders were saying, it's never going to happen. We're never going to make these kinds of changes. We're going to continue to, practice our racial practices, and you can find people saying they can't send in enough troops to make us change. Well, we have changed,
The state and the country got through it.
They've got through it, right, yeah.
Bullock brings decades of experience to the table, and as you heard, he worries about where we are right now with an attempted assassination on one candidate for president and questions about the remainder of a campaign for the other leading candidate for president. But he remains optimistic that the country can withstand moments of major political upheaval. After all, as he said, we have done it before.
Well, straight ahead here, she served as Atlanta mayor for 4 years before becoming an advisor to President Joe Biden. So coming up next, we ask Keisha Lance Bottoms about the Democrats' chances in November.
And later this week's Voice of the Voter knows how to cast a line in the water. He also tells us what he'll be thinking about as he casts his ballot in November.
On Friday, President Biden's campaign chair acknowledged slippage in support, but insisted that President Biden is absolutely remaining in this race. His closest advisors remain supportive. That includes former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms. And I asked her about the campaign and her confidence in the president. Mayor Bottoms, I want to ask you about this, just the confidence that voters have for President Joe Biden. We saw his debate performance. We are past that now. He has had several events where he was a lot more energetic than what we saw there. But I want to ask you about this new poll out this week, a new AP North poll. It says 65% of Democrats right now say that Biden should withdraw and allow his party to select a new nominee. Biden said he's not doing that. You've said that he's the best person for the job. I want to ask you, is Joe Biden the only person in the Democratic Party that can beat former President Donald Trump?
President Biden has said that he believes that there are other qualified people out there who could also beat Donald Trump. But it was Joe Biden who put his name on the ballot. 14 million Americans agreed that he should be the Democratic nominee, and that is where we stand. He's made it very clear that he intends to stick with the nomination that's been given to him by 14 million Americans. And the beauty of the Democratic Party is that we can have robust discussions without being banished, without being threatened, without being emasculated in front of people simply because we disagree. There's a disagreement in the party, but ultimately Joe Biden has said that he's our nominee. He has been voted upon as our nominee, and we'll be going into our convention to make sure that it's formalized with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at the top of our ticket.
But is it true that voters could, those who cast their vote in the primary could feel differently now after different events leading up to the debate, especially when it comes to the voters? If the voters are saying we want a different nominee, should the president listen to that?
You know, we have to take polls with a grain of salt. They can be instructive, but sometimes polls can miss the mark. I know a little bit about that because I remember the week I ran for mayor, going into the mayor's race, I was down 7 points and I was victorious. As I'm talking with everyday people, what I'm hearing from people is that Joe Biden is our nominee and we should stick with and support our nominee. So I don't doubt that there are concerns about the president's age. I've also heard concerns about former President Donald Trump's age, but we are where we are. Donald Trump is the Republican nominee. Joe Biden is the nominee from the Democratic Party, and that's who we will be going into a head-to-head match with in November.
And as a senior advisor to the president, what is your advice to help him gain that support, ignite that enthusiasm that we are just not seeing among Democrats right now?
It's important to take our case directly to the American people, reminding people what this administration has done, the difference that this administration has made in their everyday lives. We've seen what's been delivered in Georgia. A lot of the bipartisan wins that are celebrated are a result of work that's come out of the Biden administration, from the billions of dollars in infrastructure money that flowed into our community, to a cap on insulin costs. That legislation was championed by Senator Warnock and, of course, supported and signed into law by President Biden, capping insulin costs for Medicare recipients at, let me make sure I have that number right. That cost cap, I'm sorry, I believe it's $25 a month. And I cite this stat quite a bit, but sometimes you have to go back and double check your facts. But capping insulin costs, also student loan debt forgiveness has been really important to people in Georgia. Public service loan debt forgiveness. Also funds into our technical colleges, helping people get trained for good paying jobs. All these things have been a direct benefit from work that's been done on behalf of the Biden administration.
Well, still ahead, we will hear from the voice of the voter. But first, Republican communications strategist Stephen Lawson and current CEO of the Galeo Impact Fund, Jerry Gonzalez, they join us for our roundtable. You're watching The Georgia Vote.
Welcome back into The Georgia Vote. It is now time for our political roundtable. Today we have Jerry Gonzalez, CEO of Galeo Impact Fund. Galeo is a group which works to develop Latino leaders throughout the state of Georgia. And Stephen Lawson, a Republican communications strategist who has worked as a senior comms advisor to House Speaker John Burns. He's also worked for several other Georgia politicians, including Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones and Congressman Mike Collins. Right now, he is a principal at the law firm Dentons. So let's start here. Stephen, the Biden campaign and the future of President Biden's status at the top of the ticket has been in question for some time now, since the Atlanta debate. We'll start with you, and then Jerry, I want you to weigh in as well. Stephen, is President Biden going to be the Democratic nominee for president this year?
I think it gets less and less likely by the day. I think after the debate, it was really not a matter of if, but when he got out of the race. I think that day is coming very soon. I think what you're seeing over the last few days, top Democrats becoming more and more public in their calls for him to step aside. So again, I think it's a matter of when, and I expect that time to be pretty soon.
Jerry, what do you think about that?
Well, there is a process. If that were to happen, clearly it's right now it is in President Biden's hands for him to make that decision whether he does continue his campaign or not. But there is a process for that, and that it'll sort itself out, I think, in due time.
Who would you like to see if he does decide to step down? Who would you want to see in his place?
Well, I mean, clearly, Vice President Kamala Harris is with him right now in the campaign. So I think the easiest transition process would be with the Vice President.
And it might be the easiest, but do you think she's strong enough to take on former President Donald Trump?
I mean, I think that the challenges that we're facing as a country are serious with regards to facing a second Trump administration. So I think that voters will coalesce around whatever goes forward to make sure that we don't have another Trump administration.
And I want to ask you guys if we could just kind of turn to the RNC here. This has been a news point within the RNC. Lara Trump, I believe it was on NBC or CNN, she said, it doesn't matter who we go against. We're excited for the Republican Party. Stephen, I want to ask you about the rhetoric, though. The RNC started off as this rhetoric of unity. This is a party for all Americans, but then it got more base approach, more red meat to the base, especially with former President Donald Trump's speech on Thursday. Was this a convention of unity for all Americans or unity for the Republican Party?
I think it was certainly geared more towards unifying the party and the country. I think what you saw in President Trump's speech was certainly humanizing. Obviously, you could tell that this was someone who had come off of an assassination attempt. I think it rightly shook him to the core like it would any of us. And so I think that's really important that we unite, not just as a party, but as a country in terms of dialing down the rhetoric, dialing down the tone, focusing on the policies that average everyday Americans, average Georgians care about. I think that's where we need to go, not only as a party, but as a country. And as a conservative, I'm confident in that approach because I think that we're right on the issues. And if we focus on that, I think we're going to be really successful in November.
Jerry, do you agree with that as well? Was this all unity?
Not at all. I mean, clearly, former President Trump started talking about humanizing himself clearly in the beginning of the speech, but ultimately leaned heavily into a white nationalist approach on targeting immigrants and targeting my community. So absolutely it was not a unifying call. It was really leaning into white nationalist rhetoric, replacement theory that has led to violence against our community. So on the one hand, he was trying to humanize himself, but on the other hand, he was inciting violence against our community like happened in El Paso. So no, former President Trump was not unifying our country, and he was appealing to the base with a lot of hateful white nationalist rhetoric.
Stephen, I saw your eyebrows go up there. I want to give you just a moment to respond to that if you'd like, and then we've got about 60 seconds to turn to one more topic. But
certainly, and I'll be the first to say I don't agree with all of President Trump's rhetoric, but what I heard throughout the convention is a need to secure the border, and I think that's common sense policy that most Americans agree with. I think that's one of the reasons that President Biden is struggling in the pollings because he's not dealt with that issue. And so certainly I think we can all improve on our rhetoric and we can all work towards solutions, but I think at the end of the day, that's a policy that most Americans agree with President Trump on.
Jerry, we have just a moment left. I want to give you the last word here, the keys in Georgia moving forward in this election. In one sentence, what's the key issue now?
I mean, if they're talking about the economy and making sure the economy moves forward, mass deportations would certainly wreck Georgia's economy. We have $18 billion in agriculture. 40% of the agricultural industry is made up of undocumented immigrants. We take them out of the equation, there goes one industry, our number one industry. Second industry is the service industry as well, right, which is very much also supported by the undocumented population. So at the RNC, they were chanting, send them all back. Well, there's economic consequences to Georgians that they have to consider when they're talking about that.
There's so much more to talk about. We wish we could stay on this panel longer, but we need to pivot now. The good news is the Georgia Vote continues right after this. Welcome back in. We say it every week because we mean it. You cannot have the Georgia Vote without Georgia voters. And in a season where the focus can so often feel like it is on politicians, we want to make sure our attention stays on the people they serve. For this week's Voice of the Voter, we are headed to Lumpkin County along the banks of the Chastity River to meet up with Tad Murdoch, who runs his own fly fishing guide service. And we should note here quickly, we spoke to Tad before the events of this past week unfolded, but he says his broader thoughts about the upcoming election remain unchanged.
So we are just north of Dahlonega on a private water trout fishery.
I can almost feel your blood pressure go down as you get close to the water.
Always. You know, closer I get, more I hear the water, calmer I get. So then it's time to go to work.
What does a perfect day on the water when you're guiding look like?
Despite most people think it's not catch 100 fish. I like to see the growth. I like my repeat customers, but I feel like after a day on the water with me, if they can't get out and be fully confident and efficient on their own, I didn't do my job.
What keeps you coming back?
Oof, feels like home, more so than my house does. You know, I try not to keep my house cozy because I want to leave it. And whether it be this river or any river across the world, they could speak a completely different language around me. The river speaks my language.
We've got an election coming up in November. When you look ahead to it, what worries you the most?
Man, right now it's who's going to be in it. Kind of just with the recent news and all that stuff.
Right now, your biggest focus is just on who's actually going to be on the ballot.
Yeah, the ballot's the biggest question mark. Like, you know, will Biden make it there? What happens with Trump's legal stuff?
What are the two biggest issues that will govern how you vote?
The foreign policy stuff, the foreign relations stuff. If someone comes out and has a clear plan on what they're going to do, what they want to do, I would like to see that, and that would probably entertain my vote more than anything else. And then secondary would kind of be the economy stuff. Maybe it doesn't affect my business as much with, you know, whether it's high inflation or not, but I know for the guys that work for me and all that, it gouges them really hard, you know, just gas prices alone. It's not a short drive to get anywhere here in North Georgia for the most part, so that really chews into their wallet and, you know, is an annoyance to me as well.
You told us about what worries you. You told us about your big issues. We always end on this question. What are you optimistic about?
I like the fact that more people are questioning just the narratives they're told. It leads into a healthier system.
Murdoch said he is also optimistic about the potential of social media to elevate more people's voices and speed up the spread of information.
Excellent piece there, Zach. Well, a final note today, the Georgia Vote going on a brief hiatus for NBC's coverage of the Summer Olympic Games, and I will be there, a part of 11 Alive's team in Paris.
But we will be back August 18th. Until then, we'll continue to bring you the coverage of politics that impact you right here in Georgia.
We hope to see you back here after the Olympics for the Georgia Vote.